to Stanford D.school. We are excited to get to have you with us today. I just tried to make a short list of folks who've joined us. We've got Hungary and Sri Lanka and Austria, the United Kingdom, India, Latvia, Amsterdam, Philadelphia, San Diego, Wisconsin, Colorado, Thailand, Peru, Florida, Hong Kong, Louisiana, New Mexico. And that's just all I could write down. It's amazing and incredible to get to go on a learning journey with you all. What a privilege, what an honor. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to learn with us. We are thrilled to get to share the spotlight and share the platform with someone who's thinking, thought leadership, and creativity we've long admired. I'm pleased to get to introduce today Jon Acuff, who is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books, including his most recent, which he's going to talk about today, called Soundtracks: The Surprising Solution to Overthinking. Jon has been published in over 20 languages. His work is both critically acclaimed and he's adored by readers. For the record, this is the first time my mom has texted me about one of my sessions, right? So you know he's adored by readers. When he's not writing, Jon can be found on stage as Inc.'s top 100 leadership speakers. He's spoken to hundreds of thousands of people at conferences, colleges, companies around the world, including FedEx, Nissan, Microsoft, Lockheed Martin, Chick-fil-A, Nokia, Comedy Central. The list goes on and on. He's known for his insights wrapped in humor. He's had me cracking up this morning and in our prep calls as well. He shared the stage with an American icon when he opened up for Dolly Parton at the Ryman Auditorium. Jon, I didn't tell you this, but once I opened for Elton John. It's for a time for another story. I also kind of opened for Usher once, which is a totally different story. Anyway, we'll get on that later. For over 20 years, Jon has helped some of the biggest brands tell their stories, from Home Depot, Bose, and Staples. His fresh perspective on life has given him the opportunity to write for Reader's Digest, Fast Company, the Harvard Business Review, and Time Magazine. He lives outside of Nashville with his wife, Jenny, and their 2 teenage daughters. And we're gonna get a chance to talk about his creative process today. So this is a unique format today where we're gonna hear about his latest book for about the first half of the session. And then the second half, we're gonna flip the script and we're gonna dive into the behind the scenes on Jon's incredible, prolific, and interesting and unexpected writing process. So with that, I would like to invite all of you to join me in welcoming the Jon Acuff.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to this. I'm going to talk very quickly because there's so much content to cover. I'm going to share my screen right away. We're going to jump into Soundtracks. As Jeremy said, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to talk about my latest book, but then we're going to talk about what does it look like to create? How do we create profitable, fun, engaging content? So I'm going to start with Soundtracks. And to start with Soundtracks, I need to start with a confession. I am a goal nerd. I love goals. One year I read 100 books. One year I ran 1,000 miles. One year I hired a ping pong coach because I wanted to get better at table tennis. Let me know in the chat if you did that goal too. Anyone else here hire an elderly man from mainland China to throw hundreds of ping pong balls at you while yelling kill, kill, kill in a rental property? Anybody else do that exact goal? I imagine I'm probably alone in that one, but I love goals. I write books about goals. I tweet about goals. I even have a podcast called All It Takes Is a Goal, where I interview people about the goals they're working on and the goals they care about the most. And the reason I love goals is that a goal is the fastest path between where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. It's the fastest path, but there's a problem. What I've learned over the years is that starting is fun, but the future belongs to finishers. Everybody starts. 92% of all New Year's resolutions fail, according to the University of Scranton. 92%. You have a greater shot at getting into Juilliard in New York City to be a professional ballerina, which is an 8.6% acceptance rate, tiny dancer, than you do at finishing a goal. And we've all had big goals we started and we stopped. I mean, fitness goals, for instance. The 3rd Friday in January is called Quitter's Day, according to Strava. Using 80 million users, they can see that's when more people quit their goals, 3rd Friday in January. It's so easy to start, but how do we actually finish? And so for the last 10 or 12 years or so, I've been studying what does it take for us to really finish the things that matter creatively in our careers, in our families. And I kept running into this idea of mindset over and over again. I kept bumping into mindset. That mindset got in the way. And one particular part was causing the most damage. It's overthinking. People tend to overthink their goals and they get stuck with their goals. And so I really started to focus on that and say, okay, what is overthinking? How do we deal with overthinking? I'll give you a couple examples. Let me know if you've ever done this. Have you ever told yourself an elaborate story about why somebody didn't text you back? So you sent a text and then they didn't respond, or worse, they responded with bubbles and they pulled it back. And you know, nobody pulls back a compliment. Nobody goes, I was going to say you're beautiful, but I'll just not do that. I was going to say you're talented, but I pulled it back. So you start to tell yourself this story. Could they have misinterpreted what I said? Was I too rude in that? Should I have used more exclamations to let them know I'm excited? That's overthinking. Here's another example. Have you ever read an email you've already sent? So you send an email, an hour later, a day later, maybe even a week later, you go into your sent email folder and reread that. That email's gone. Like there's nothing to do with that. That's a form of overthinking. Have you ever had an idea and before you even wrote it down, before you even put it into a notebook or your laptop, you self-edited and said, no, it's too dumb. Somebody smarter's already done that. Nobody would go for that. That's overthinking. Think about the works of art, the cures for diseases, the books, the businesses we've lost to overthinking. And here's the thing you learn about overthinking when you study it. It's not a personality trait. It's the sneakiest, greediest form of fear because it steals time, creativity, and productivity. Every year it steals from all of us. And I wanted to get a definition of it that I could actually work with, a working definition. Here's how I define it. Overthinking is when what you think gets in the way of what you want. So you can see what you want. You've got the idea, you've got the horizon, you want to write a book, you want to lose 10 pounds, you want to scale a company, and then all these thoughts get in the way. But is it really that big of a problem? I was curious about that. So I did what I always do when I get curious. I commissioned a research study with a PhD named Mike Peasley. He's a professor at MTSU outside of Nashville, where I live. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Our population, demographic-wise, is 90% musicians, 10% bachelorette parties. That's how our population breaks down right now. 90% musicians, 10% bachelorette parties. Wherever you're watching, from Peru, from Texas, from California, if your city doesn't have bachelorette parties in it, don't worry, they're in Nashville. They're fine, they're safe, they're all wearing the same outfit. Jean shorts, cowboy boots, cowboy hat, shirt that runs frisky with whiskey in some fashion. But in Nashville, I have this professor that I do research projects with. So he and I asked 10,000 people if they struggle with overthinking. And we wanted a huge sample size because unfortunately, a lot of times online, when you see an article, it says 50% of Republicans, 50% of Democrats, 50% of this political party feels this way. If you actually read the article, they interviewed 11 people and 4 of them were named Larry, and they don't have a big sample size. So we went to 10,000 people and said, do you struggle with overthinking? And more than 99.5% of people said yes. So it's one of those problems that everybody thinks they're the only one that has, but then everybody actually hasn't. And so I really started to study it because we did that study before the pandemic. This was 2019. 2020 was catnip for overthinking. If you weren't overthinking before, you definitely are now. Why? Because right now, everything is a thing. Every part of your life has extra thought. I mean, think about it this way. A few months ago, I was at an event and I met somebody new and they went to shake my hand. And right before they shook my hand, I was like, should I refuse? Should I fist bump? Is the fist bump scientifically safer? Should I twist at the hips because the hips don't lie and give them an elbow bump instead? Should I shake their hand, but then immediately put my whole arm into a vat of hand sanitizer as if to say, excuse me 1 second while I scrub off this deadly pandemic you just tried to murder me and my grandparents with? Just 1 second. And then I started looking around the room and I was like, are other people shaking hands here? What does that say about us politically? What does that say about who we voted for? Do you know what I thought about 3 years ago when somebody tried to shake my hand? Nothing. I just shook their hand. But now every part of your life has extra thought. You never once for the first 99% of your life wondered if you were going down the wrong way on a grocery store aisle. You never once thought, wait a second, is this an up aisle or a down aisle, this chip aisle? But now everything has extra thought. So I started to study mindset, and I'm so surprised how many people would say, just stop thinking, stop overthinking. One, that's impossible. You were built to think. You're a thinking machine. 2, you can do that a little bit, but not all day. I love meditation. I love mindfulness. That's 10 minutes of my day. That's 30 minutes of my day. What about the 23 and a half other hours? What if I could choose the thoughts I listen to? What if I could turn my thoughts into things that work for me, not against me? Because you and I have the great benefit of growing up in the age of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a fairly new science that says your thoughts can change the physical structure of your brain. That's how powerful your thoughts are. They can change the structure of your brain, which means that we can just think different thoughts that are helpful. Our parents' generation didn't know about neuroplasticity. Their parents' generation thought you should smoke cigarettes during the Tour de France. That's a true story. Cyclists would smoke cigarettes during the Tour de France because they thought the nicotine opened up the capillaries in their lungs. Can you imagine us doing that today in 2022? Going, oh, got a big mountain in France. Give me a Lucky Strike, quick, light me up. No filter, no filter. I want pure cigarette. Every generation learns something new. We're learning about mindset and what the brain can actually do. And when you learn that if you can spin, you can soar. If you can worry, you can wonder. If you can doubt, you can dominate. What if you could turn all that overthinking from a super problem into a superpower? You can. And all it takes is a soundtrack. That's just my phrase for repetitive thought. I've heard people say, a thought is a leaf on a river or a car on the highway or a cloud in the sky. But for me, it's a soundtrack, because often you don't even notice the soundtrack. It's playing in the background, but it changes the entire scene. I mean, think about a movie. They open up in a little house, maybe a white picket fence, some kids frolicking, but then they change the soundtrack to something ominous. It changes everything, doesn't it? Suddenly you go, don't go in there. It's quiet. It's too quiet. There could be a creepy clown in the sewer. Watch out. What if they play a happy song? What if they play Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles? Suddenly it's a rom-com. Suddenly somebody's making their way downtown. This is completely different. That's how powerful our soundtracks are. And the longer you listen to a thought, the more it becomes part of your permanent playlist. So the longer you listen to a thought, the more it becomes part of your soundtrack. So you have a soundtrack for every job you've ever had, for every city you've ever lived in, for every relationship you've ever had. I work with leaders all the time that are given new leadership positions and they're pulling back. And if you pull the thread and go, wait a second, why are you pulling back on this leadership opportunity? It's because when they were 14, a teacher told them, you're not a natural leader. And they believed that. And then they listened to that soundtrack for the next 20 years till they actually believed, I'm not a natural leader. There's a certain type of person who's a leader. There's a certain type of person who's a natural creative. And I was told I'm not that. And I was told by somebody in a position of power. And I've believed that for 20 years. And you have to go, whoa, we have to change that soundtrack. And that's what we get to do, is we change our soundtracks. And what's really interesting is your brain is so powerful. Here's my favorite example. NYU did a study a few years ago. They brought two groups of college kids in. They said, hey, to the first group, we want you to take these words, gave them a word bank, and make some sentences. To the second group, they said the same thing. They said, hey, here's some words, make some sentences. But that group's words had some special words hidden inside it. Words like old and tired and slow and bald. They hid all these words about being old in their collection. And then they said to the students, hey, the second part of the test is down the hall, please take it. And as they walked down the hall, the scientists secretly timed them how long it took them to walk. And the students who had been exposed to the words about being old physically acted older. They walked slower, just reading words unconsciously about being old. That's how powerful your thoughts are, which is actually great news for us, because what it means is great thoughts lead to great actions. Great actions lead to great results. Often we over-focus on the results we want, but we never change the underlying thoughts that are generating everything, and we never get the change we really want. And what's interesting is when you do that, everything changes. When you start with your thoughts, it leads to actions, it leads to results. And there's three ways you do that. You retire your broken soundtracks, you replace them with new ones, and then you repeat those new ones so often they become as automatic as the old ones. Retire the broken ones, replace them with new ones, repeat the new ones so often they become as automatic as the old ones. What I'm going to talk about today is that first step, retire. How do you and I retire our broken soundtracks? What does it look like for us to deliberately retire our broken soundtracks? Well, some examples of some broken soundtracks that you might have heard in the last 2 years are things like, that's not how we do things here. It's not how we do things here. I've heard this one dozens of times from sales teams in particular. I've spoken to a lot of sales teams. They've said, Jon, if you get me in a room, I close the room. I'm a need person. I'm an in-person person. I'm the queen of coffee drop-off. I've got all these accounts I service, and I pick up the coffee and donuts, and I work the room. And then all of a sudden, the room was off limits. The room became illegal. And they'd say, I can't do this. I mean, I can't do Zoom. I can't do WebEx. I can't do Microsoft Teams. This isn't what we're supposed to do. That's not how we do things here. You've maybe heard that one before in your own life. That's not how we do things here. How about this one? There's never been a day that turned out the way it was scheduled. So why do we talk about the schedule? I heard that one from a big dental practice, huge dental practice. And the hygienists were frustrated because the schedule there was different every day. They couldn't plan for an 8-year-old to chip his tooth at a baseball game. And so they'd go, why do we even bother? And that's a huge soundtrack of apathy. Why do we even bother? We never reach our goals, so why do we set them? Now, if you want to identify a broken soundtrack in your own life, I'll give you a 30-second activity. It takes 30 seconds. You can do it later today. All you do to figure out if you have a broken soundtrack is write down a goal, write down a dream, write down a hope. It can be anything. It can be, I want to grow my business. It can be, I want to turn a hobby into a side hustle. It can be, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to run a 5K. I want to move to a different city. I want to date more. I want to date my spouse more. It can be anything. Write it down and then listen to the first thoughts that come next. Listen to your reaction, because every reaction is an education. Are your first thoughts after seeing that goal, well, you should do that. You'd be amazing at that. You're so qualified to do that. Or are they the opposite? Who are you to do that? You don't have the ability to do that. You always promise yourself you'll do stuff and you never follow through. Which way are it? And what's interesting is fear will argue both sides of the coin. When you're in your 20s and your 30s, fear goes, you're too young. You don't have enough experience. No one would listen to you. But then you hit like late 30s and fear goes, you missed your shot. It's too late. You missed your moment. And you want to say to fear, when was I the perfect age to do this? As if fear would go, there were 10 minutes when you were 31. It was in October. It was a Tuesday. It would have been perfect. So listen to your reaction. So what do you do when you find some broken soundtracks? Well, you ask the loudest ones 3 questions. Not every thought. Who has time to analyze every thought? You have like 60,000 thoughts a day. You find the loudest ones, you ask 3 questions. And I'll be up front. These are Trojan horse questions. And what I mean by that is they look really simple. You're not going to be impressed by a single one of the words I'm about to use. But if you'll actually sit with them, there's deep knowledge hidden inside. First question, is it true? Is the thing I'm telling myself about myself true? Is the thing I'm telling myself about this opportunity true? Is the thing I'm telling myself about this obstacle true? One of the greatest mistakes you can make is assuming all your thoughts are true. It's one of the greatest mistakes you can make. Even though your thoughts have lied to you again and again and again and again, we trust them. And the reason why is simple, because each thought you have is delivered in the voice you're most familiar with, your own. We hear our thoughts in our voice and therefore assume, well, I must be telling myself the truth, even though your thoughts have lied before. My favorite example of this question being asked during the research study was a guy named Sal St. Germain. He was an electrical manager in Hawaii, and his team felt stuck. They felt handcuffed by their parent organization. If you've ever worked at a company, you've got a parent organization or executives above you, it's easy to feel like they've got us handcuffed. If they really knew what we needed to do, we could run, we could do so much more. That's what his team thought. So Sal decided, I'm going to ask if that's true. So he went to his manager. He said, is it true that you're holding us back? Is it true that we're handcuffed? Because that's what the team is saying. And his manager was shocked. His manager said, no, what are you talking about? Like, our job is to equip and empower you. We're waiting on you to tell us what you need. You're in the market. You're in the local trenches. What do you need? How can we help you? And Sal said, knowing that changes from a team of victims into a team of partners, which is a nice story. I mean, Sal got a new thought, but again, we're not aiming for new thoughts. We're aiming for new results. So I said to Sal, did that change the bottom line though? Like, did that change your results at all? And he said, well, knowing that helped us save $14 million over the next 5 years. So when I tell you that overthinking is expensive, that's one of the examples. So the first question you ask is it true? Second question, is it helpful? Is it helpful? When I say this again and again and again, does it push us forward or does it pull us back? Every company I've talked to in the last 2 years is having hiring issues right now. I spoke to a company a week ago and they said, we have executive level positions, $250,000 salary per year, and we're getting ghosted on the interviews. They said 3 out of 4 people don't even show up for the interviews. We now book multiple interviews at the same time slot because we know most people aren't going to show up. Every company is having that trouble. But is it helpful for you as a company to say over and over and over again, hiring's impossible, hiring's impossible, hiring's impossible? Of course not. Now, some of the pushback I get to overthinking is people say, John, I'm not an overthinker. I'm detailed. I'm into logistics. I like to be prepared. I think you should be all of those things. I think those are amazing things. But let me show you the difference. Preparedness, when you think about preparedness, it always leads to actions. Like, if you're prepared, you do the thing, you act on the thing, and it leads to action. Overthinking always leads to overthinking. If you're prepared, you can see a trail of the actions. You can see what you've actually done. Now, my favorite example of this question in real life, because that's what I'm always trying to do, is bring it back to real life, was I talked to a manager and he said, John, 12 years ago, I got fired. got fired from my job. I've been fired before, not a great experience. And he said, in that moment, I recognized at my next job that I started to overthink if I was going to get fired again. That's very natural to happen. And he said, I noticed that every time a door would close on a meeting that I wasn't invited to, I'd start to go, why am I not in that meeting? Should I be in that meeting? Who else is in that meeting? I'd go check the agenda of the meeting. I'd see who is in there. And let's say he only does that 10 minutes a day, one day a week, once a day, 5 days, 50 minutes, not a big deal. 50 minutes a week, who cares? But then you pull the thread over a 12-year period, that's 62 8-hour workdays. He's donated the equivalent of 62 8-hour workdays to that broken soundtrack. Now, the reason we ask more than one question is simple. Some things in life are true, but they're not helpful. Is it true he could be fired? It is. It's true of all of us. But is it helpful for him to tell him that self again and again and again and again? Of course not. So you have to ask that second question. And then you ask the third question. Is it kind? Is it kind? The easy way to think about this is, if I said this to a friend, would they still want to be my friend? If I talk like I'm talking to me to somebody else, would they still want to be my friend? Now, this is the question that when I talk to a group of high performers, and by the way, you're all high performers. Like, I hope you understand that. And I mean that from my heart, because low performers don't voluntarily watch stuff like this. Low performers don't even know this exists. Like, people that listen to my podcast, people that buy my books or sign up for my courses, they're not low performers. They're always people like you, Philippe, going, okay, I want to do more. It's the middle of the day or it's the middle of the night. I saw people checking in from Asia. It's 10:30 p.m. You're voluntarily here. But sometimes when I talk to high performers and I share this question, they go, oh boy, this feels real fluffy and soft and emotional. We're going to light a sprig of sage and get in a drum circle in Malibu. Like, there's going to be a hugging exercise Jon gives us. I have to hug 3 people today. So let's pull it back to science. A few years ago, Google wondered, what do our most successful teams have in common? So some of the teams at Google, killing it. Some of them, they're doing okay. So Google wondered, what do our most successful ones have in common? So they launched something called Project Aristotle. Project Aristotle did 3 things. Spent millions of dollars and measured 180 different teams. And it used 35 different statistical models to figure out what do our best teams have in common. And the number one thing they all had in common was psychological safety. That was what every successful team had in common. So what does that mean? What does that phrase actually mean? Well, here's how Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School defines it. It's a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. What does that mean on a Tuesday, though? Because I like to live in the Tuesday world. The problem with mindset is it's so holistic, it's so fuzzy. What will I actually do with this on a Tuesday? Well, here's what that means. On great teams, you can ask questions, you can suggest new ideas, and you can admit you're wrong without, and here's the kicker, without being treated unkindly by the team. So why do those 3 things matter? If you can't ask questions, learning is over. If you can't say, hey, I have a question about this, or hey, I don't understand this, or hey, could we try it a different way? Learning is over. If you can't suggest new ideas, innovation is over. Like, you lose all access to innovation if you can't suggest new ideas. Your people start leaving their best ideas in the parking lot. You start leaving. That's every bad job you've ever had was based on the % of you couldn't bring inside. And if you can't suggest new ideas, innovation's over. If you can't admit you're wrong, you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes you've made again and again and again. You only get to fix the mistakes that you actually own. You only get to fix the mistakes that you admit. And you have to be able to do it without being treated unkindly by the team. So what's an example of what that might look like? Well, here's a simple soundtrack switch. What if you stopped saying, that'll never work here, and started wondering, I wonder how that could work here? A lot of the words are the same. But instead of saying, that'll never work here, say, I wonder how that could work here. And I learned that one the hard way. A few years ago, I was on a flight sitting next to a guy named Jeremy Coward. Jeremy Coward is one of the most successful photographers in the world. Forbes, Huffington Post, Yahoo, all named him the most influential photographer on the internet. He's done everything from portraits of Taylor Swift to photos of Rwandan tribes that are reconciling after genocide. He's presented at the UN. I mean, he's done everything. And one night we're on a flight and we were both flying to Portland, Oregon to speak at an event called the World Domination Summit, which sounds like an event where dictators go get soft skills, but it was just a really fun artistic community with a really fun name. But we're on this flight and I say to him, hey, what are you excited about? Like, what are you working on right now? And I love to ask people questions that start conversations like that. Like, my favorite question to ask a valet, like if you ever go to a hotel and they only have valet parking or a restaurant, ask the valet, what's the most exciting car you drove this week? That kid will light up. They'll instantly light up and go, somebody came in with a Lamborghini the other day. It was amazing. Like they become a human instantly for you, not just a valet. So I said to Jeremy, what are you excited about? And he said, well, I'm actually working on a hotel. He said, I want to do something called the Purpose Hotel, where every room sponsors a child in need. And there's a charity water well in the lobby, and even the soap is sustainable. And I want to build a hotel. And then he got quiet. And he did that thing that people do when they've shared something that's special to them. They get quiet and they wait for your reaction. Like your kids do that to you. Your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend does that to you. Coworkers do that to you. And he paused. And I would love to tell you today that I had a great supportive reaction. Like I would love to tell you that I was like, you should do that, but that wouldn't be true. My reaction, like my face was like, ooh. And my words are like, I mean, a hotel sounds really challenging. Are you sure you could do a hotel? I really discouraged him. And years later, he would tell me how crushing that was to him. And you know who didn't react that way? Horst Schulze, the co-founder of the Ritz-Carlton. He's working on that hotel with Jeremy right now in Nashville. So I knew I needed a new soundtrack. And here's what I came up with. The soundtrack that I was going to live with, if I was going to be the type of leader that people could bring new ideas to, was curiosity beats criticism. Curiosity beats criticism. And that's not to say every idea is amazing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying you have to exaggerate, not at all. But when you're at the beginning of innovation, curiosity beats criticism. There's time later to poke holes. There's time later to ask hard questions. But at the beginning, curiosity beats criticism. Now, the fun thing about soundtracks, when you start to work on them, you start to see them everywhere. You're going to hear soundtracks everywhere once you get the concept. I mean, individuals have soundtracks. Couples have soundtracks. Families have soundtracks. I've written 7 books. This is the only book that I've ever had parents say after I wrote it, will you please write a version for teenagers? Parents came out of the woodwork and said, if I could have learned how to change my thinking at 13, at 14, at 15, it would have changed my whole life. And I thought that's a really interesting idea because I started to see teenagers with soundtracks. We were at a swim meet one day and this girl got out of the pool. She was 14 years old. She said to her mom, I'm the slowest swimmer here. I'll never get better. I'm the worst. And then she walked away. And my wife and I just looked at each other and said, oh, that's just a broken soundtrack. She can change that. In fact, if you're a parent and you hear your kid use absolutes, it's probably a broken soundtrack. If they say, I'm the only one who doesn't have a phone, I'm the only one who wasn't invited to the party, I'll never get better at geometry, listen for those broken soundtracks. And we didn't have a book for that. So I partnered with my 2 daughters. I have 2 high school age daughters, and we wrote a book, Soundtracks for Teenagers. It comes out this fall. And I asked them to help write it because I knew if I wrote it, it would sound like an adult trying to sound like a teenager. I'd be like, hello, fellow street youths. What is up? I feel lit and savage. Drake is not just a duck. He's also a rapper. I know stuff. Like it would have been terrible. So I actually had teenagers help me because families and teenagers have soundtracks too. Companies have soundtracks. Teams have soundtracks. Everybody has soundtracks. And I wanted a really simple way for me to understand what does it look like for somebody to turn a super problem into a superpower. So here's what I did. I commissioned an artist to help me capture what this looks like. I had somebody commission like a visual of it because I'm a visual person. And so we made 2 different posters. One shows you the retire, replace, repeat. And the other one shows you kind of a flow chart of the 3 questions. Okay, so how do you know it's true? How do you know it's helpful? How do you know it's kind? And so if you want either of the posters, I'll just send them to you for free. Just scan that QR code. If you want the posters, it's a digital file. And then I'll give them to Jeremy too, because if your country, you're watching for different countries, if the scan thing doesn't work in your country, or if there's, it won't let me text it to you, whatever, I'll make sure Jeremy has a copy of them too. So anybody in any country can get the resource too. But that's a little snippet of what Soundtracks is. It's obviously a small portion. And then Jeremy and I, when we talked earlier, we're like, okay, can we do 2 cool things? One, if there's somebody that has a broken soundtrack they're curious about, can we talk, can we do a live talk through that? And then 2, let's talk about the creative process that goes into these things that you and I sometimes get to create. So Jeremy, you want to jump in and let me know if there's one we want to flip?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thanks so much, Jon. I mean, I've taken pages and pages of notes here. So hugely enlightening, hugely entertaining. I thought Rajiv, who I'm going to invite on, if you're able to turn on your screen, please, or turn on your video rather, that is, oh, something just changed on my screen here. Where are we? Okay, I'm going to ask Rajiv, I think maybe because you turned on your video. No, did you? Rajiv had a soundtrack that he mentioned, Jon, that I thought was pretty powerful. It said basically, I'm too old. And I would like to invite him up if I can find him now. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Rajiv, I'm going to add you to there we go. So tell us a little bit about this soundtrack, Rajiv.
Yeah, because I'm 60 and telling myself I couldn't possibly or that. I mean, I couldn't climb, mountains or whatever. And I know sort of deep inside that these are things I could do, but I sort of write myself out of that script and say, no, this is not me anymore. I could have done it 20 years ago, but not anymore. That's sort of a recurring problem that I have. I hope that makes sense.
Totally. So the first thing I'd say is that's really common. Sometimes when we have a broken soundtrack, we think we're the only one. So the first thing I'd say is that's a really common one. So there's a lot of people that feel that same way. So don't feel the isolation of that broken soundtrack. There's a lot of people that feel that way. Second thing I would do is I would focus on a new soundtrack. Like I have wisdom that takes years to get. Like you have things, Rajiv, that took you a long time to get. Like for me, for instance, it took me about 12 years to really figure out how to title a book. So I can't go back and say, I wish I knew this at the beginning because there was a process. So now what I can do is say, if somebody wants help on how to title a book, I can save them 11 years and 11 months because it's a fairly, I've got the process down. They don't have to pay the cost of the years. So I'd love to help you refocus. Okay, what are the things I know that take years to learn? What are the experiences I have that take years to learn? I'm a big believer in going, okay, what are the things that I've acquired over the years? And then the second thing is I always try to go, okay, like there's always going to be regrets. That's part of life, but I'm not going to live in the regrets. I'm going to try to learn from them and then put them down. Like, is there a lesson? And then I'm going to learn from it. So for me, if you find yourself spending a lot of time going, man, when I was 40, I could have done blank. Or if I was 45, I could have done blank. Or I wish I did this when I was 25. I was a mess in college. Like Rajiv, I was terrible in college. I got put on social suspension for a year. I got into raves. I was going to raves my senior year. My grades were all over the place. My father-in-law, when I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, said no. Like he said no to my face, like worst moment in a Waffle House ever. And that was the right thing to say. So when I went to my daughter's college, she's going to the same school I am. And I was sitting there on campus. I just had this wave of regret that I had wasted that opportunity. But here's what I need you to know, Rajiv. Like you can't waste your potential completely. Like you have, like, as long as you're still alive, there's more potential. I always think about it like an acorn. I love picking up acorns because they're such a perfect picture of potential. Like an acorn has 10,000 pounds of lumber in it. Like you pick up a whole handful of them, you're holding a mile of a mountain. Like it's amazing. But the thing with an acorn is after a few months, after a few years, it's over. There's not a thing you can do to bring that acorn back to life, but you're not an acorn. So for me, if I were you, I would write down on a Post-it note because like on my walls, I have soundtracks I need to be reminded of. Like this one says, ask for more. I wrote that one down in 2020, August of 2020, because I found myself undervaluing my work when I was negotiating. And I realized I need some soundtracks that are going to help me with that because I'm having a hard time negotiating at the right level. So all I did was write down on a piece of paper, ask for more. And I've seen this silly piece of paper hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So what I'd want you to write down is, I'm not an acorn. I'm not an acorn. Because fear is going to tell you, you missed your shot, you're too old, there's no more potential, the window's gone. And you go, no. That's true of acorns, but turns out Rajiv, not an acorn, not an acorn. And for me, little things like that are always helpful. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was super brave, dude.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rajiv, so much. There's John, there's a couple of other folks who are eager. I don't know if Julie, if you're able to turn on your video so we can see you. Let me ask if you're able to. We've got Anna here. I'll start with Anna since I see your shining face.
Awesome.
There. Anna,
hey, Anna.
Are you able to unmute, Anna, by the way? Sorry.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a super interesting, and I just wanted to share with you that I'm just standing in front of starting my own company after finishing Stanford lead program.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, thank you. And doing also working full time as a single parent, right? And I just have this moments exactly this broken soundtracks. Like I just even wrote it down. Like, why should I succeed, right? I had some companies in the past, and I was not able to make it through, to push through, right? So it is really very helpful, and I mean, would appreciate your comment on that. Something, that I'm just building how to say, building my new soundtracks now.
Sure. So the big thing I would encourage you on is a new scorecard. Like, this is a new season with a new scorecard. One of the biggest mistakes we make is we look at our old setup, our old life, and we try to compare our current situation to the old life. And instead you go, no, new scorecard. So when you say, hey, I've had some businesses that didn't work in the past, you weren't even that person anymore. Like, you're the person that just finished the D.school. Like, the person who didn't do good at those other businesses hadn't gone through the D.school. Like, you're a completely different Anna right now. So for me, I think, okay, this is my new scorecard. And I especially say that to single parents, because y'all are superheroes. Like, sometimes what'll happen is I'll meet people and they'll say, Jon, I'm just not, I'm not working on my goals hard enough or my dreams hard enough. And I'll go, well, tell me about your life. And I go, well, I'm taking care of an aging parent who has dementia, and I'm a single mom. And they'll name 7 really challenging things that they're not giving themselves credit for. So they're measuring themselves against a scorecard from 2 years ago when they weren't caring for a parent with dementia. And you have to go, no. So right now, Anna gets a new scorecard. I've got a new scorecard because you're a new Anna. And so, like, there's times when I'll look forward in the future and I'll go, how am I going to get another book deal 2 years from now? And I'll go, well, that's 2 years from now, Jon's problem. Like, he's going to figure that out. He's going to have so many more skills in the next 2 years. I'm not going to forecast that. Like, that, I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible for him. I try to take care of my future self by being disciplined in the present moment, but I don't have to figure out 2 years from now Jon's challenges, because those are going to be his. And so it's the same with you. You're a current new Anna. So new scorecard. The Anna from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, who didn't do well at certain businesses, that person doesn't exist anymore. She didn't have the skills you have right now. And so measure yourself on this current scorecard, not 2 years ago, not 3 years ago.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Oh, great. Thanks for the question.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. Folks, I want to shift gears a little bit and just spend the last 10 minutes talking about something that's fascinatingly interesting to many of us on the line here, which is the creative process. And Jon is a prolific writer, prolific creator. And I thought it'd be really interesting to just have a peek behind the curtain and talk about some of the tactics that he has found. I mean, even saying, I learned how to title a book after 12 years. That's fascinating, right? But I thought maybe starting with Jon, how do you think about conception of an idea? When in your process do you know if you've got a book? How do you approach the writing craft? Do you wait until you get the idea to start writing? Do you write until an idea, tell us about that.
So my first thing is I collect a lot of ideas. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. So if you can't write, it's because you don't have enough ideas yet. I never sit down to a blank piece of paper. Blank pieces of paper are terrifying. I always bring friends. I always bring ideas. So start with the idea gathering, the idea curation. My favorite quote on creativity is Dorothy Parker. I put it in my new book, Soundtracks. She said, creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye. So the wildness is you collect things from everywhere. You collect a question from Anna. You collect how a menu wrote something that was interesting to you. You collect a song lyric that made you think, and you have them all that. And then you have the discipline to see the connection between them in a way no one else has ever seen before. So like one of my talks I worked at Bose 20 years ago, and we had had a huge head start in the speakers, like high-end headphones were doing great for us. But then consumers said they wanted colors. Consumers wanted different colors. And we ignored that because all we cared about was sound quality. So I say to the audience, you know who didn't ignore that? Dr. Dre and Beats. And they ate our lunch in a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then I say, after a pause, we broke the #1 rule of electronics. We forgot about Dre. And that line kills every time because it's unexpected, but it's also an example of me pulling ideas. Bose, consumers, a rap lyric that people will get. And so I collected a lot of ideas. And then I really, really, when it comes to, if you want to start a business, if you want to start a podcast, if you want to write a book, there's 3 things to look for. This is my Venn diagram of a successful idea. We could do a whole hour on this because I'm such a geek about it. The first thing you look for is a passionate connection. You have to be passionately connected to the idea, because otherwise you'll give up on it too soon. So you look for a deep passion, deep personal passion. Second thing you look for is a need. Do people actually need this? And the need can be, when I talk to neighbors, it keeps coming up. The need can be, I see people online talk about this. The need can be classmates in the Stanford d.school are mentioning this, or I'm seeing this culturally in articles, whatever. And then the third thing you look for is your spot in the market. Is there a place for you to fit into the market? And that's the Venn diagram I use. So for instance, I wrote this book called Finish, about finishing goals. And I had a passionate connection to it. I start things and wasn't finishing. And so I was curious on a passionate personal level, can I go from being a chronic starter into a consistent finisher? Like, are some people born finishers and I can't learn, or could I learn that? So I had the personal connection. Second thing was looking for need. I wrote a book a few years ago called Start, and a lot of people came up to me and were like, hey, no offense, I liked your book Start, but I've never had a problem starting. I can register 50 URLs at GoDaddy right now. Like, I can start a million things. How do I actually finish? So I realized, wow, there's a need. And then the market, I went to Amazon, and the only thing that comes up if you type in the word finish in Amazon is dishwasher detergent, because we culturally over celebrate the beginning and we ignore the finish. So I had my Venn diagram, and here's the thing. Say you have a passion for it. Like, it's a passion for you. You go to the market and nobody's serving it, but then you realize nobody needs it. Do you know what that is? That's a hobby. I love that you're passionate. I love it's not being served in the market, but if nobody needs it, that's a hobby. Like, I love that you're into albino ferrets and you're like, I want to do albino ferret ownership lessons. Like, nobody needs that. That's a hobby. Say you have tremendous passion. You feel like people need it, but it's already overserved in the market. That's a cake pop. Like the dessert, the little cake pops. Like, if you told me, John, I'm going to do this crazy new idea called cake pops, I'd be like, oh no, dude, we've had that for 10 years at Starbucks. Like, by the time it's at Starbucks, we've probably already filled the market. Last thing, if you have tremendous need and a tremendous market, but you're not passionately connected to it, you just created a day job. Like, it might make some money, it might be successful, but you're not going to be connected to it. You just built yourself a new day job. So that's how I look. You know, when I'm writing a book, I'm trying to go, what's a need in my life? So overthinking. I just wrote that because I'm an overthinker. So I was like, okay, then what did I do? I asked 10,000 people if they need it. They raised their hand. Then I went to the market, and every book on overthinking was like, stop it, stop it, stop it. And I was like, what if the counterintuitive approach is to make it work for you? Like, the reason I'm able to be prolific as a writer is because I channel all that overthinking to the places I'm trying to go. Like, I didn't learn to stop thinking. I just said, ooh, I think I stumbled into a superpower that everybody's ignoring. I think all of you guys watching this today have that same superpower. Let's go. That's how I thought about it. And that's kind of my process.
Now, one thing that, to me, just thinking about the wild eye and the wild mind to disciplined eye, those things don't, I wonder where in the process they crystallize. Like, when do you panic if things haven't crystallized? When do you give yourself permission to be exploring? Yeah. How late can you incorporate a new idea, right? You know, like, if you chart progress, you know, how does that work?
Well, so I do chart progress. There's my progress chart right there. That is me charting 500 hours towards the next book. That's the last 20 weeks of progress, week by week. And so I know, like, when somebody says to me, how long does it take to write a book? I'll tell you, like, and then I'm also leaving myself notes along the way. So Jeremy, the first 100 hours, I think 4 or 5 times, no, this is the idea. I got it. I'm doing it. And then I write a little bit like, no, this idea sucks. And then, like, so it took me, I have a note up there, 280 hours to get to 60 solid pages and a good outline. So for me, like, one of my goals, I talked about being a goal nerd. I want to spend 700 to 800 hours every year crafting ideas. Like, and crafting ideas can be, I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm having conversations with people, I'm collecting ideas, like I'm using my notebook, whatever, because I know it takes me 500 to 600 hours to write a book. So if I'm faithful to those 800 hours, there's a book that comes at the end of that process. Like, I know, like, that's just going to happen. That's just math. And so that's how I'm looking at it. And then I know I'm going to try to capture 1,500 ideas in notebooks like this. So, like, here are the last, like, this is the last, like, 2 or 3 years or so. And so I know that, okay, I keep a numbered list of ideas. So, like, yesterday, like, I wrote, okay, here's one. Idea 706. I've written 706 ideas this year. This was from yesterday. I was in a cab or in a lift, and this amazing man from Peru named Marco gave me a ride, and we were talking about how expensive gas is. And it, like, his story was amazing. He's like, I'm paying $1,000 a month in gas. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I gave him a $40 cash tip at the end of the ride. Like, I didn't go through the average, just gave him $40. And he stopped and said, you just made my day. So when I got to the airport, I wrote down, it takes about $40 to make someone's day. Now, here's the thing. At the beginning of the process, there's no bouncer for this notebook. Nobody gets kept out. There's no velvet rope. Anybody gets into this. Not every idea gets out. So I'm continually kind of touching them, reviewing them, going, oh, that could be a book, or, oh, that could be a book. Like, how do I move this? Like, oh, these two are related to each other. Now I'm seeing the connection, so that when I get into a conversation, whether it's, you know, at a speech, whether it's something like this, I'm pulling ideas from a bunch of different sources because I've curated them. And so, like, for me, I talked to a business coach the other day because I feel this great pressure to scale. Like, I get around entrepreneurs that are like, I'm making $1 bajillion and I'm scaling. I feel this great pressure. But for me, I know crafting the ideas is the thing. So I'm much more like a small sushi chef that's like, I want to be really good at this type of cut. And like, the idea is the thing. So I'm curating that idea where, you know, if I was running a big business and the writing time and the crafting ideas time dwindled, I might be able to make more money theoretically, but I'd lose access to the thing that gives me the greatest joy, that I think allows me to really serve a lot of people. And I don't want to miss that. So I'm also trying to go, okay, 800 hours, how do I do it? And how do I be deliberate?
So last question for me. But first, I want to just mention, when Jon and I spoke in preparation for this talk, a month ago, I think you told me in our conversation, you go, ooh, that's a good idea. And you actually wrote it down. And I think it was idea 476. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that. To me, it's actually interesting to go, yeah, yesterday I wrote down idea 706, which is, I go, okay, 476. That's 250 ideas the last month since we talked. I mean, and the discipline of it, I think, is astounding. So I just want to compliment you on that and just give that data point. The guy's writing ideas down. I mean, I was in a conversation a month ago.
So funny.
400s, you know, so that's cool. The last question that I think would be really helpful to folks, and by folks, I mean myself, is how do you think about your calendar? You know, you say it takes me, you know, I have a goal to spend 700 to 800 hours a year crafting ideas.
Yeah.
To me, I think one of the biggest enemies is rationalization, right? I can rationalize why any hour spent is an idea crafting, or an hour crafting ideas, right? How do you actually legitimately protect the time versus tell yourself you're doing it when you're not really doing it?
Well, I mean, I always tell people, like, most goals are optimistic lies. They're things they're like, and they're great. They're optimistic, but they're lies because they're not tied to your calendar. Like, the calendar tells the truth. And I know the only resource that I can really measure well is my time. And so I'm a big believer in the idea, like, I don't consider myself a very disciplined person. I don't think I have a ton of willpower. I don't think I have a lot of grit. But what I do is, instead of trying to force something to happen, I find something I love so much, it makes other things small. Like, I didn't learn to like get off of Instagram or like delete Twitter from my phone. I still use it on my computer, but like, I took it out of my pocket because I have willpower. What I did was I found a thing I love so much, it made everything else feel pale and boring in comparison. And so, like, for me, having a big writing goal, having a big thing I'm working on, makes it easier to say no to other stuff that's just trying to distract me. And I feel like it's easy to crush right now because, like, for instance, I read in a book the other day, the average American, and I don't know the numbers internationally, but the average American watches the equivalent of 2 months of TV a year. 2 months, dude. If you watch 1 month a year, you're killing it. So I feel like culturally, it's easier than ever to just crush, because if other people are watching the equivalent of two, or if somebody tells me they're too busy to write their book and then they tell me about their 7 fantasy football teams, I'm like, I'm going to blow your mind. Like, research less punters on your 4th football team. And like, so for me, that's where I do it, is that I steal time from other things. Like, again, this is so geeky, but it's true. Like, I have a list of the last 7 flights I've been on, how long it took them to actually leave. Because I discovered there's this like 35-minute window when I sit down on a plane until they leave. And I go, oh, I'm too busy to be reading. And like, there's all this time. It's like, hey, you were going to like scroll on TikTok and just maybe feel worse about yourself. What if you read this book for just 20 minutes? You don't have to do the whole thing, but like, so I'm trying to like have greater self-awareness to see the time that's around me and to use it, and then be generous with the ideas that I create out of it. And so that's what and then the last thing I'd say, Jeremy, is I try to be really kind to myself. Rigid goals fail because they have too many failure points. So like the reason an Airstream is such a desirable design for an RV, it has very few seams. Like it has very few places to leak. Now, what happens sometimes with goals is we make all these rules and we go, okay, Jeremy, only writing counts. And it has to be this type of writing, or only reading these types of books, or only, and then you make all these rigid rules, and then there's places for them to fail or for them to leak. So what I try to do is I'm going to err towards generosity and kindness to myself. So if I want to read a silly graphic novel, because I'm like, I think there could be an idea in this Batman book, like, okay, like if I want to do something like that, I'm going to be fairly generous. I'm not going to binge watch something and go like, really, if I binge watch this show is kind of about crime and I'm kind of writing about, like, no, like, so I'll cut myself off on silly stuff, but I try to be pretty open-ended on what I consider, crafting idea time.
Yeah, I love that. I would say with the exception of Get Back, the Beatles documentary, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think permission to binge and it's idea time. Total
but
permission.
that's ideas. That's gold. Like same with like the documentary Artifact about 30 Seconds to Mars, the Jared Leto band. They went through, they got sued by EMI, and it's this really interesting study and an artist going, do we go with the label? Do we not go with the label? Like I was like, oh, that's like, that fits. But there's a ton of stuff where I'm like, I know that like watching an Office rerun for the 50th time where I'm saying the words back to it, like right. I'm either depressed or I'm avoiding something else. Like,
that's great. Jon, I'll give you the last 4 minutes. Is there anything that you want to wrap with, or anything you want to address that you saw in the chat that we didn't have a chance to cover today? Please take it away.
So one of my favorite, I think, most helpful soundtracks over the years, because people sometimes say, okay, I wish I was fearless. Like, I want to be fearless. And that's a popular kind of Instagram thing, like how to be fearless. But I don't believe in that, because I think every time you do something new or at a different level, there's a level of fear. So for me, the first time I spoke to an audience of 10 people, I had a 10-person size fear. And it was, I spoke at a rehab center. I was trying to become a public speaker, and guess who nobody goes to talk to? Rehab centers. And so here's this audience of people who really need help. It was really kind. And so, but it was 10 people. I had 10-person size fear, but I worked on that. I got over it. And then I spoke to 100 people and I had 100-person fear. And so sometimes people say, how do I get over my fear? And I always say, you don't get over fear, you go through it. Change out the word over for through, because over is a perfectionistic word. It's okay, it's one wall that I've climbed and then I'm over it. I love that you go through it. I go through it. So, I spoke to 1,000 people, 1,000-person fear. Spoke to 10,000-person fear, because at each new level, there's new fear and excitement that comes with it. So I'd say you don't go over, you get through. And then the other one is fear gets a voice, not a vote. Fear gets a voice, not a vote. A lot of times when we ignore our fear, it's trying to help us. Like it might be exaggerated, it might be too large, it might be too repetitive, but on some level you can learn from fear and go, oh, okay, this is what it's trying to tell me. I need to pay attention to this. So fear gets a voice, it doesn't get a vote. It doesn't get to sit at the head of your table and go, you don't do that. Like Anna doesn't get to write that, or Tara doesn't get to do that. Like you don't put fear at the head of the table and give it a gavel, but it does have a voice. And I think once you accept that, the next time you feel afraid, you don't feel shame. The bad thing is when we feel afraid, we go, I shouldn't feel afraid. No one else feels afraid. I can't believe I'm still afraid of this thing. But what if instead you said, well, okay, I see that fear. It gets a voice, doesn't get a vote. Is there anything new I need to learn from? If there's not, like fear, we've already dealt with this. You've got a voice, you don't get a vote. So I think that one's a good soundtrack for right now, because there's a lot of fears. We're coming out of a tough 2 years. It'd be easy to bring some residual fears into this moment. And so I just encourage you, don't get over fear, because that's a perfectionistic word. I still am afraid of stuff. I still, you go through it, and then fear gets a voice, not a vote.
You heard it here first, folks. Thank you so much. Actually, not at first, but you heard it here, hopefully again. Jon, yeah. I just want to give you sincere and hearty thanks. You're, I think, an exemplar of this notion of masters of creativity. We've been delighted to have and honored to have the privilege of spotlighting creative practice, virtuosic creative practice across disciplines. And I really see your craft as something that you've honed and grown over time. And so it's a privilege to get to learn from you.